Hello guys and welcome to the Coding with Tom. Today we're going to learn how to get the info from our users and use it to manipulate our DOM. In this case we'll be asking for three numbers between 0 and 255 so we can get the RGB values, and then by clicking the button we'll be able to change the background color according to our user's input. We'll be approaching this problem with three different solutions, so stick around. We already have some HTML and CSS here. We basically just have the three input boxes, each one with an ID for each one and a button here. And we have also an ID for a button, because you already know when we want to call for elements, it's actually pretty good to have an ID for each one of them. And then we have a div with also an ID. It's basically this div that we're going to change, and I gave it some height and some width to make sure that we're actually going to be able to see the div changing. So our first solution is going to be an event attribute. It's an on-click event attribute. Click, and we need to add this to our button, and it's basically just on click. We want for it to do something, and in this case it's get RGB values, or color if you prefer color. There we have our first function here, and we now need to state our function and build our function in our JavaScript, and we can just start by doing this like so. Get RGB color. Okay, so now we need to understand what we want to do. We want to get the value for each field that's just here. If I press 33 here, I want to get that value, and actually the input box has a property that's called value, and we can just achieve it by pressing document.getElement by ID input red, for example, for our first input box, and dot value. And it's basically just that. At this point we'll be getting the value for our first input box. Now we actually are getting the 33 here, but we need to store it in some way, because just stating everything like this is going to be really difficult at some point of our lives. So we can just create a variable and set it as var_red equals document.getElement by ID input red dot value, and we're actually getting the 33 here. And we can do the same thing for the other two. We can just copy paste everything. If you press Ctrl+C here and enter Ctrl+V, it just copies your line and puts it on the line below. So we need to change this to green and change this to blue, and just change the idea that we're getting here. So we're getting the values here, but we actually need to pass them to this div. And I'm pretty sure you guys already know how to do this, and it's basically just document.getElement by ID color this. And now JavaScript allows us to change the styling of our DOM just by typing style. And in this case, and it's a bit different from JavaScript, because in this case you'll type background.color, but in the case of our JavaScript it's actually working with camel cases, and it needs to work like this. It's a background color equals. Now let's think for a moment what we actually want to get here. We know that RGB values are set like this: RGB parentheses X, Y, Z, and with the commas. But if we just type this like that, we're going to have a value that really doesn't exist. We're just going to set a value that really doesn't exist into our JavaScript. So we need to change it. We need to put everything between quotation marks. That it really just isn't represented with our code that we have so far. So it basically just means that we have to put the RGB and the first parenthesis here, and we add the plus sign. And in this case, let's first simulate with this code, and it's an X here. Plus, we have the comma here, and I'm just going to add some space to it, and a Y, and another comma here, and finally the Z. And of course, we can't forget the last parenthesis, and we have it like that. So that's basically, this is basically, if we had the values of X, Y, and Z, that's basically what we have here. But considering that we actually have variables set here, we can just change it. And green here, and finally blue here. So take a moment to understand what actually just happened. So we have the document.getElement by ID, the color this, and I'm pretty sure that, yep, of course I have the color ID written differently. .style.background color, of course, and then we're getting the RGB value for it. Considering that we already have the variables for each value here, we can simply state those variables amongst our code. However, since RGB parentheses and the commas and the other parentheses really aren't stated anywhere in our code, we have to pass them as part of a string so they can actually be read as part of the property for our background color. And that's basically it. And we can just wrapping at the bottom of our body. If you press run, and then we have 33, 55, and 44, wherever are the values, and we press the RGB color, we're actually getting our div colored. And yeah, that's basically working, and that's pretty amazing. So as I stated before, we're actually going to have 3 solutions. So I want to comment this out, and I want to present our second solution. That's basically just going to be an add event listener. I'm not a big fan of having the on-click events on our buttons, mostly just because I prefer just to get the elements, everything with our JavaScript. It's easier for me. So as an add event listener, what we want to do is just to document.getElement by ID, and in this case, since we want to add an event listener to our button, we actually need to get our button that already has an ID. It's the color button. We set it here, and we add the add event listener to it. And of course, the event that we want to listen for is a click, and the second parameter needs to be the function that basically just states what's going to happen when you click the button. And yeah, that's basically it. So now we need to define a function of what happens here, but we also already have done that. It's basically this is the function that we have here. We're just dynamically getting our button and adding an event listener to it. It's basically the same thing, but without typing this. So we can just copy paste this, and there's no shame in doing so, because that's basically just how coding works. And that's basically done. We're doing the same thing, but instead of defining a non-click function here, and I can actually, just making sure that I didn't delete anything important, and I did. I removed this. We can just remove the on-click here from the button altogether, and we can press run. And if I do 33, 22, and 88, it's actually getting an RGB color again. So it's basically just the same thing between this and this, but the difference is just that we're not defining anything on our button on our HTML. We're just adding the event on our JavaScript. And finally, for our third and last solution, it's just a matter of, I'm going to actually type it above this just to make sure that everything is seen. We're just making it work with as few lines as possible. That's basically just this solution, as few lines as possible. So let's think a little bit about what we're actually trying to do here. We're trying to color this div, and we have the input boxes. And we're at this moment we're stating that we want the input boxes, each one to just adding a variable to each one of them, and we're actually wasting 3 lines, wasting between quotation marks, obviously, just wasting 3 lines with stating each input field to have a different variable. So let's start by stating that we want to get element by ID, and we want to select our button here, and of course we want to add an event listener to it. It's going to be pretty much the same here, and the click function, and the click event, and the function here, and then this. So as I was saying before, we're just picking each variable here and each value here, and we're stating it as part of our code, and we're stating as each variable, but we can do something different. It's actually pretty interesting the way we can do this. We're stating a variable, but in this case it's a variable that just says input boxes, and we're going to document.get elements by tag name, and we're just stating that we want the input boxes. This is not ideal. The solution is not ideal at all. We're just doing this to make sure that we're using the least and the fewest lines possible to write our code. It's just different ways to do so. But basically what we're doing, we're stating a variable, and we're saying get every element that has a tag name of input, and it's basically just these three ones. If we had more extensive code, this really wouldn't work, but in this case it just works. So yeah, we're getting this, and as I stated in our past video, this just gets us an array. So for us to get each different input box here, we would actually have to write it like so. This will get our first input box because it's of index of 0. If we want to get the green box, we'll have to put it as 1 and then as 2. And we can use that to actually create our code. And in this case, I'm going to copy this from here because it's going to actually be the same thing. There it is. But we don't have a red here, we don't have a green here, and we don't have a blue here because we don't have those variables. What we have is the input boxes that we're going to put here, input boxes. And as I stated before, we can get the red one by stating that is the input box, the first element of our array. I'm going to copy this. We know that the green one is as the second one, and we know that the blue one is at the third one. So if we press it run now, and I just type some values here, and why isn't this working? And of course this really isn't working because we need to state the value that we want to get, the value here, and I'm going to explain why in a few seconds. .value. So this is basically just getting an array of elements that are 3 different input boxes, but it's actually just getting the input boxes. It's just stating, okay, I have in one input box, I have the red input box at 0, the green input box at 1, and the blue input box at 2, at the index of 2. But we need to get a property from it. We need to get the values from it. So that's why we're adding the .value here. It's basically the same as this. Basically the same. I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen. It's basically the same as this, but we're just shortening everything out by removing this and putting the input box .value there. So yeah, if it's a better solution, it is not. As you can see, it's actually working. It's not a better solution, but it's actually just using 4 lines of our code. And that's pretty great if we need just to get a quick function out there and we need to add something to our code. And yeah, guys, there it is. 3 different solutions for the same problem, and I really hope that you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I would suggest for you to first Google them, and mostly because you'll end up learning some tools by yourself, and you may end up approaching different solutions for the same problems, and yeah, that's the best way of learning. But if you really just can't figure anything out, just comment, and if you want to see more of this type of content, just subscribe and give it a like, and stick around and give some suggestions if you have anything that you want to suggest.